This is Michael Abrash, the legendary programmer who has worked with the likes of id, Valve, Microsoft, and Oculus. Currently, he resides at Oculus as their chief scientist, according to his CV. However, his foray into virtual reality doesn't start near Facebook. I bring this up because Mr. Abrash is partly responsible for the Valve Index, even if he has been at Oculus for over 5 years. The story is long and complicated and starts back in 1992. 90s Microsoft has been described in many ways, and entire books have been written on the company's dealings. The few operating system divisions, meaning the programmers and designers responsible for projects such as Windows 3, OS2, and later NT, would later become tech icons themselves. For example, in 92, the Windows team held a few recognizable names, such as Gabe Newell, Mike Harrington, and a contractor named Michael Abrash. Abrash said in 2012, quote, "Mike Harrington went far out of his way to help me when I started contracting with Microsoft in 1992. I doubt I would have survived at Microsoft otherwise." Gabe Newell, following the unreleased work on a Windows port of Doom, saw the value in leaving the business-focused Microsoft to form his own business focused solely on games. Mr. Newell stated many times that Windows was the second most installed piece of software on the public's PC. The first was Doom. Mr. Newell attempted to rally many colleagues to leave, and although the initial enthusiasm was significant, the actual number of initial walkouts was much smaller. He co-founded what would become Valve Software with Mike Harrington in 96 and began searching for ideas on what their first game would be. It was a while earlier that Michael Abrash had left Microsoft to join id to work on what would become Quake. Abrash later said, quote, "In 96, id was visited by Mike Harrington and Gabe Newell, who were leaving Microsoft to start Valve and wanted to license the Quake source code to build their first game on. No one else at id was particularly interested in licensing them the source code or even talking to them for that matter. But I knew Mike and Gabe from my time at Microsoft, so I stepped in and facilitated getting the license done. It was around this time that Harrington and Newell asked Michael Abrash if he wanted to be a third co-founder of Valve. However, he chose not to, and left id and returned to Microsoft instead. Now that that's out of the way, let's jump ahead to 2012. Michael Abrash has been at Valve for 2 years, working on incredibly secret projects related to virtual reality and wearable technology. Small teams of experimental engineers formed, and around this time, people such as John Carmack and Palmer Luckey began creating the first modern VR prototypes. The team at Valve was very supportive of what Luckey and Carmack were working on. However, at the time, it seemed as if Valve wasn't entirely confident on their own hardware teams and continued to experiment. That changed on August 2nd, when the Kickstarter for the Oculus Rift went live and raised far more money than initially anticipated by everyone involved. The video on the page had supportive testimonials by Gabe Newell and Michael Abrash, pledging Valve's full support for the project, and Valve's priorities were focused. On August 4th, Mr. Abrash interviewed with Rock Paper Shotgun at QuakeCon 2012. Quote, "We're pursuing what wearable stuff could exist that could enable you to have new, compelling entertainment experiences. It's about giving customers experiences that they want. We'll do whatever it takes to make that happen. It's a big space and it's unexplored, but we're looking for deep, rich experiences. I don't know what they are, I'm not a game designer, but the technology has to be there. Again, hardware changes and enables things. So the first question is, how can the hardware change to support experiences? That's the first thing we're looking at. Around this time, another valuable player joins Valve. Hardware engineer Alan Yates entered in August of 2012, at the start of the dedicated VR team led by Abrash. Yates later stated, quote, "I was super fortunate to work at Valve right around the time Michael Abrash had begun the AR/VR research team. It was a much smaller team than it is now, and it has since grown to encompass about a third of the company. But the key individuals that solved most of the really hard technical problems and facilitated this generation of consumer headsets are still here, working on the next generation." From here, Valve continues to work in earnest on virtual reality, attempting to create the best possible experiences with zero regards for creating a commercial product. It was all about creating the best experience with the highest amount of presence possible. In late 2012, Valve created what was dubbed the Valve Room demo, lining the walls of a tiny room with pictorial codes read by a camera mounted to a headset. It was this VR demo that got writer Chet Falisak interested in the team, and he joined as a designer, and later a pseudo-spokesperson for Valve's VR endeavors. All of Valve's research and development was shared around the industry, as people like Abrash saw value in distributing the research and demos to other companies. For example, Valve rebuilt the exact room demo for Oculus.
Valve's goal is to enable great VR for the PC, so we've shared what we've learned through our R&D with Oculus. We've showed them our prototypes and demos, we've explained how our hardware works, and we've provided them with feedback on their hardware designs. By showing them a prototype with low persistence, we convinced them of its importance, and the lack of blur in Crystal Cove is a direct result of that. We collaborated with them on tracking as well. And we're continuing to work with them to improve tracking, displays, lenses, and calibration, and we're excited about where they're headed.
The very first dev kits for the Rift started to go out around this time, and Valve created the first pieces of software, porting Team Fortress 2 on March 19th and Half-Life 2 on May 9th, 2013. A GDC talk was given by important Valve VR engineer Joe Ludwig about the porting process of TF2 into VR a few days later.
Oculus is actually out there doing this, and we're partnering with them because they have the hardware and we have the software, and we can help each other out, and we can both learn a lot in the process.
For the next year, Valve continued with research and development, refining their prototypes, sharing information, and creating ways to achieve what they called room scale, without the need of wallpapering your room. The answer turned out to be lasers, and it's around this time that the first hardware prototypes of Valve's Lighthouse were being built. In February of 2014, the first Steam Dev Days was held, where both Palmer Luckey and Michael Abrash gave talks on the state of virtual reality.
And if some of you might have already seen Valve's VR demo, probably not enough of you, and it's probably the best consumer virtual reality system in the world right now. We want to deliver that caliber of experience with the consumer Rift, and we think that we have a really good shot of doing it.
The new Oculus development kits were set to be released very soon, and Valve was a public backer of the project. The virtual reality industry appeared to be a rare example of major companies working very closely together to create the best possible product. Valve went on record from 2013 and 2014 stating that they had zero plans to develop a consumer headset of their own, and instead wished to continue working with Oculus. However, Facebook bought Oculus on March 25th, 2014 for $3 billion. Michael Abrash was hired by Oculus 3 days after the buyout as a chief scientist, and Valve went silent for over a year.
Valve's goal is to enable great VR for the PC, so we've shared what we've learned through our R&D with Oculus.
And if some of you might have already seen Valve's VR demo, probably not enough of you, and it's probably the best consumer virtual reality system in the world right now.
We've showed them our prototypes and demos, we've explained how our hardware works, and we've provided them with feedback on their hardware designs.
Following a few years of Valve showing zero interest in creating a headset themselves, in early 2015, things appeared to have changed. Instead of Valve still backing the Oculus horse, at GDC 2015, Valve started to publicly compete with Oculus and Facebook. The HTC Revive was announced at GDC, being the only headset to formally support Steam VR, as although Steam VR could be used with the Rift following the Facebook acquisition, the headset came with its own software. The Revive, at the time, was the only HMD that allowed for room-tracked movement, utilizing Valve's Room demo as a commercial product. When GDC 2015 came, the Vive was announced to be released at the end of 2015, and after a few delays, the Vive was delivered in early 2016. That said, the relationship between Valve and HTC was not perfect. The Vive sold over cost. HTC made announcements on behalf of Valve, and they caused much public confusion on exactly who owned what. According to a Valve employee quoted in October of 2016, quote, "They screwed up the launch and insisted on unnecessary margins of about 10% on top of BOM and staff. We agreed to a partnership under the impression that they would sell at cost. They're close to cost, but still making a profit on the hardware, which we didn't agree to and are not okay with. We're actively looking for additional partners for Steam VR branded headsets. They also love to make announcements on our behalf that aren't based on reality whatsoever. At the time, they said we were working on a Half-Life game for VR, and then we weren't even thinking about a first-party VR game, let alone Half-Life." Another Valve employee interviewed in late 2018 had different opinions and proves that there is no one single opinion at Valve. Quote, "We still have a good relationship with HTC, and they're continuing to work with us on technology and other things. They used all our technology for their first devices, and they're continuing to use our technology for their current and probably future devices. So the relationship's good. We're kinda doing different things from them, and once we start talking about all of it, it will become more clear why Valve's gear is different from what HTC is making." A few months following the Vive, Valve announces that they will allow anyone to license the Lighthouse Tracking system for their own VR headsets for free. It was evident that Valve wanted to be partnered with more than just HTC. The issue is that this was around the time Windows Mixed Reality headsets inside-out tracking started to release. Only the Vive and Vive Pro ever released with support with Valve's tracking system. Lighthouse is being replaced by the more convenient yet far inferior inside-out tracking methods. So if Valve wanted to keep their own technology alive and see the experience be represented in the best way possible, they would have to create their own system.
And although we're not going to treat Dev Days this year as the place or the time to make big product announcements related to the content that we have in development at Valve for virtual reality, I do think that once it comes time to do that next year, that nobody in this room is going to be disappointed about what we have in the works.
This was in October of 2016. Whatever Valve was planning for virtual reality, the seeds of these ideas very much date back to at least this point. There have been signs of this for years, going back to February of 2016, when the version control for the Steam VR test bench was accidentally left public, leaking hundreds of virtual reality development assets. Patents were being filed regarding ways of mitigating the problems, specifically of this generation of HMDs. Chet Falasek was touring the world, giving keynote addresses about Valve's then history into virtual reality and hinting towards the future. At Dev Days, even though this characteristically empty promise was made, many important things were shown to the public, including the second generation of Lighthouse, Valve's own Steam VR hardware development kits, and most importantly, Knuckles, were all announced in October of 2016. The general opinion and plan at Valve was changing. The following month, developers started to receive their first set of Knuckles prototypes, and work continued in silent. Leaks began appearing in the community regarding a possible VR title codenamed HLVR, and the public awaited for next year's Dev Days on the announcements that Valve was creating. In February of 2017, Valve announced that they were creating 3 full-length independent VR titles. However, in May, Chet Falasek left Valve, leaving a massive hole in communication between Valve and other VR developers. When the time came for another Dev Days, it was announced that Valve would not be holding the convention in 2017 and likely wouldn't either in 2018. So the Coomer promise ended up going unfulfilled, and the public was left in the dark once again. As time moved on, Knuckles continued to be iterated on. A trademark for something called the Valve Index was filed in mid-2018, and patents kept being registered. A Portal-themed Knuckles demo was released in June, and many were wondering exactly where Valve's VR games even were. From the perspective of the press, there was only ever evidence of a single game being worked on in earnest, being HLVR, so no one was capable of figuring out exactly what the 3 games were. When Valve redesigned their website in early 2018, they teased some hardware by showing off an image of Newell wearing some monstrosity of a headset prototype. The silence continued until November of 2018, when images of a Valve-made VR headset leaked onto Imgur, and the doors flew wide open. Details were pouring in from many sources who wished all to remain anonymous. Incredibly high resolution, fantastic audio, optics, tracking, all in a package that Valve was aiming to be around the price of the Vive at launch. Valve remained utterly silent on the matter. However, in March of 2019, following Valve's VR absence at that year's Game Development Conference, and following the announcement of an incredibly underwhelming Rift S, the correct decision was made. Valve was releasing their HMD, and it was called the Index. It took a little while for the real information to be revealed. However, once it went up, whatever stock they had intended on manufacturing sold out in minutes. Future production cycles of the headset had reservations being taken, and the Index was pre-ordered and reserved up until September at the latest. Now, this either means that VR is in no way dead, especially considering that this headset and controllers combined cost as much as the Vive at launch, or Valve only has a significantly minimal number of units to sell at the current time. Either way, the hype is high. What was missing from the announcement and reveal were the 3 VR games announced over 2 years earlier. No one was willing to comment on it, and everyone was hoping that Valve would package a game alongside the Index. However, it didn't happen. Further into May, when the VR team held a press event in their offices, a single comment was made. Valve would be releasing a flagship VR title in the year of 2019. The title is heavily rumored to be Half-Life related, however, all information that came out of the press event was hardware related. What needs to be asked is that if Valve's next major VR title is only months away, then why not wait to release the device at the same time? Whether or not this game is HLVR, it's no secret that Valve has been creating entire, long-form VR games for years, and getting close to completing one of them. So if we can expect this game in 2019, a year that at the time of writing only has 6 months left, why not wait? Obviously, the team behind the Index and the team behind the games are 2 very different sets of people, and this flagship announcement was made by the Index team. And it's entirely possible that not everyone on the software side of things was even aware that this announcement was going to be made. A lack of team-to-team communication at Valve is a problem we have been discussing for a long time on this channel. Does the hardware team not have faith in the software side of things? Have Valve promised other companies announcement rights? Is the Index team rebelling and releasing ASAP in an attempt to keep the project from being shelved? The situation is confusing, and it begs to have answers. A limited number of press were able to spend some time in the new HMD during this press event, and talk with some third parties, like Stress Level Zero and Alchemy Labs, and discuss the release plan with a few Valve employees at the event. A few weeks later, review units were sent out to the same limited number of press people, and on May 28, 2019, the review embargo lifted, and a massive amount of information poured out from both the press and VR developers on Valve's own first-party in-house VR headset. Following the end of the review embargo, new information on precisely what the Valve Index was started pouring out. It became incredibly apparent that all the decisions made by the engineers and designers were to create the best possible experience, regardless of cost. All the arrangements made were done so mindfully and without compromises. If a specific design choice appears to cause an inferior feature compared to the competition, it was done due to the significant upside that outweighed it. For example, the Index has a resolution of 1600 by 1440, the same as the Vive Pro, released over a year prior. However, since the Index uses an LCD instead of an OLED, the sub-pixel arrangement combined with the optics solution effectively increases the apparent resolution significantly and dramatically mitigates the screen door effect seen on previous generations of enthusiast HMDs. So the LCD contrast problem is greatly outweighed by this mitigation of the screen door effect. The field of view of the Index can change based on how close the user chooses to place the panels in front of their eyes, but at its maximum, it's around 135 degrees. Not the widest on the market, but the highest quality of FOV due to the complete lack of distortion in the periphery, along with an incredibly generous sweet spot in the lenses, allowing users to look around using eye movement, not only neck movement. Now, when compared with the offerings in this space by Oculus, the Valve Index defeats the Rift S in almost all specifications. However, the main feature that was teased in the original reveal was a physical IPD slider. IPD, or Interpupillary Distance, is the measured distance between a person's pupils. Each person has variations in this distance, so adjusting a headset's lenses to line up correctly is incredibly important if the user wants things to be presented as best as possible. The Rift S, which isn't even being manufactured by Oculus and instead was outsourced to Lenovo, adjusts IPD in software, a feature so inferior that Valve decided to reveal their headsets with an image that shows the slider in prominent view. Now, as a side note, Oculus has been very open about where they want VR to head. All-in-one solutions could be a great product one day, but the Quest hype has died down, and Facebook has started limiting the types of experiences on the Quest in an attempt to make the hardware appear far more powerful than it is, as well as telling developers to design for the Quest and then scale up. At the current time, it seems this avenue for providing an immersive all-in-one VR experience still needs some growth, especially in regards to computer resources. Valve, since the very beginning, has been on a quest to create the single best VR experience, regardless of inconvenience, cost, or resources required. So it's no wonder that Valve has chosen to take the path of the enthusiast, likely in a hope that they will be able to solidify specific features on the high end, and then the lower end will follow suit. Valve and Facebook are not really competing against each other. However, the vastly different paths the companies are taking will have an effect on the entire industry, based on what developers choose to develop for. There's another feature that shows that Valve is aiming in the opposite direction than its contemporaries. When the first generation of HMDs were ready for release, it was generally agreed upon that the best refresh rate and frame rate of both the hardware and software respectively would have to be 90. The software would aim to hit 90 frames per second, while the panels in HMDs would allow for low persistence at 90 Hz. This was the case for the Vive, Vive Pro, Rift, PSVR, and most Windows mixed reality headsets. However, following the announcement of the Quest, mainly a beefed up mobile CPU paired with near enthusiast level tracking and controllers, Oculus needed to save resources wherever possible, so their standard was lowered to 80 Hz for both the all-in-one Quest and the enthusiast level Rift S. Valve, on the other hand, announced a headset that officially supports 120 Hz, and through a recent SteamVR beta update, 144 Hz. The integrated audio solution is a feature not given much attention. However, according to the developers that have units, this is the best feature of the HMD. These are not headphones, they are open-backed speakers that are not designed to ever touch your ears. When initially reporting on the leaks related to the Index, this was the single thing I got wrong. These are not haptic headphones that let you feel what you hear. These are speakers that can sound better than every other integrated audio solution without touching your head. Every press outlet and developer has mentioned how the physical nature of these speakers allow you to hear the sounds of the room when needed. However, they still have excellent bass response, volume, and range. The audio has been described to me as magical. Something else that has been universally praised is the comfort of the Index. I have had the foam-like material on the headset's face gaskets, head straps, and controllers be described like an incredible memory foam pillow that never wears out. There is girth and heft to this material, and it doesn't give the impression that it will ever tear, peel, or shed. The face gasket on the front is also magnetic and incredibly easy to replace. On the front of the Index, there is a piece of translucent dark plastic that is held in place by magnets, revealing behind it what is referred to as the frunk, or a recessed bay with a USB 3.0 Type A slot for expandability. 2 cameras also sit on the front, with software allowing for a stereo view of your play space from within the HMD, and although the entire system is wired, it has quite a longer cable compared to all other PC-driven HMDs. All of this packaged together for between $800 or $1,000, depending on what hardware you choose to order. With the headset alone costing $500, many people are asking, is this worth it? Where is all this extra money going? As I've explained, this is by far, by miles, a better experience than the competition, and the price reflects that accordingly. This is not being sold with a large profit margin in mind, if any. Gabe Newell himself admitted to the hardware only allowing for razor-thin margins at best, and since Valve has criticized HTC for not selling at cost in the past, they might be as well. No expense was spared in the development of this headset, and there are many costly quality of life features put in place for the sake of the experience, such as physical eye relief and IPD adjustments, incredibly comfortable yet expensive foam, and the single best integrated audio setup to date. The user is getting what they paid for. Now, the first wave of pre-orders are said to ship in late June or early July. However, if reports are to be believed, Valve may only have recently figured out when these headsets are actually going to be sent out to users. If the Knuckles and Index were purchased, then expect to enjoy the single best VR experience possible in modern times, even if the Portal demo, Aperture Hand Labs, is only 8 minutes long. Now, all that's left for Valve is to release their killer app for VR, and if Valve believes in their deadlines, we will be seeing one before the year's end. Next time we talk about VR on this channel, we will be discussing everything known about that next game. And thank you very much for watching. If you like this kind of content, check out my Twitter. I keep everybody up to date on everything that's going on in relation to the topics that I cover. If you want to be able to support this channel, check out my Patreon, link down below, where everybody gets to view my content early and have their name in the credits. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Tyler McVicker. This is Valve News Network. Have a good day. Adios.